Everyone, and welcome back to She Plays the podcast. I am stoked to be joined today by Gianna Belcastro, who is the founder and host of the Women's Sports Matter podcast network, a one-stop shop for all things women's sports. Thanks so much, Gianna, for coming on the podcast.
I really appreciate you asking me to come on. I'm super excited to talk about all things women's sports matter. And yeah, I'm just super pumped.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited to have you on because so much is going on. I feel so much in this last year, even the last couple of months probably has been happening for you. So let's start from the beginning though. How did you get into podcasting or getting Women's Sports Matter going?
Every time I'm asked this, I'm like, do you want the the long story or do you want the short story? I'll go short story first. Short story, I was bored in the pandemic. I started when I believe I was 17, and it was the start of the pandemic, and I was home my senior year of high school. I didn't really have much going on. At that point, I kind of stopped caring about my classes. Only reason because my school did something very special where our grades could not go lower. They could go higher. And I was already doing pretty well at that point. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to do something else. So I was like, I've just wanted to get in the women's sports world. I kind of felt the buildup starting to happen. And so I was like, oh, I'll start a podcast. And then I did that. And now 2 years later, it's just flourished into something that I've never could have imagined that it would be like this. I have been surprisingly shocked at just being able to interview athletes and other people interviewing me about the show, because it's just something I never could have imagined to happen.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, and what got you into sports in the first place? Did you play sports growing up? Chicago based, right? So
yes.
Lots of good sports teams there. Who did you watch growing up and all that stuff?
The Chicago White Sox.
There you go.
My family are huge fans of the White Sox. One of my uncles was a bat boy in the 80s for the Sox. And we have our own little brick in front of the park for our family. One of my parents learned how to drive at Comiskey in like the parking lot. So we're huge Sox fans. But I grew up going to games, watching almost every game. Now it's been a little bit lax because I'm watching more women's sports than when I was growing up. So it was definitely Sox only. I didn't really care about the Bears. I don't care about football. I don't really like hockey as much. So definitely the White Sox. And after that, when I played baseball too growing up, so that was like a huge part of it. And then when I got to grade school, just playing with the basketball teams, volleyball teams, high school basketball, soccer, and then ultimate frisbee. So I've just been very involved in the sports world ever since I was like a toddler.
Awesome. Do you remember the moment you realized the Chicago Sky or Chicago Red Stars existed near you?
I remember the Sky one because we went to a camp day game, and if anyone's ever been to a camp day game, not as a camper but like as an adult, you know how just crazy loud the people are there because kids will scream for no reason. I was not one of those kids, I would like to say, but I just remember like the game and what happened. Like it was the Chicago Sky and the Washington Mystics, and that was a time where Stephanie Dolson had blue hair and the Sky lost that game, but I remember just how much fun it was. And Red Stars, I didn't know they existed until during the World Cup in 2019. And then just after that, my love for women's sports in the Chicagoland area just it blossomed, and I'm just super proud to be near a city where there's 2 women's professional sports teams, and then with AU included now being here, it's just so cool to be able to experience that as a fan.
Yeah, love it. Well, and so tell me too, because started as a fan, but now you work in the women's sports industry. So what's that transition been like, and what have you maybe learned that is different than what you thought?
So I work in men's sports, unfortunately. but I've covered my fancy credential for WNBA All-Star game. That was just, I don't even know who decided it was a good idea to let me go cover as media, but I'm glad that they did, because it was just so surreal to be there as a media member. I would have never imagined that I would be like covering sports in person. So just to be able to do that is just incredible. I get speechless every time I talk about it, because it's just, I still can't believe that someone gave me a credential and they're like, okay, you can go cover this, because that's just, it's wacky. But I work for a bunch of Chicagoland teams. So I just finished up with the Chicago Wolves and then the Chicago Steel. I currently work for the King County Cougars, which is an independent baseball team in Geneva, Illinois. We're planning a women's sports night. By we're planning, I mean I'm planning. I convinced my boss. I was like, hey, let's have a women's sports night. And he's like, okay. So we're having that on August 17th. But and then I sell 50-50 tickets for the Chicago Fire. So I'm just trying to get my foot in the door as many places as I can. But it's super fun to work in sports, and I'm just glad I have the opportunity to do that.
But you do, your podcast and your podcast network do revolve around women's sports.
Yes.
So you might, I mean, I would consider that working
Sometimes,
in the women's sports world.
If people are nice enough to be like, hey, we want to sponsor your show, I would consider like promoting that kind of stuff as work. But at the end of the day, I just think of it as a hobby.
Yeah.
It's just something that I love to do. It's not a job. I would like to work in women's sports. But I guess after college is over, maybe. But a lot of the sports team stuff that I was doing was like, 50-50 or kids zone. It's not like a real job in a sense. It's not like where you're sitting 9 to 5 working at a desk. But I love all these experiences. I just, working in sports is just, you got to experience it. It's so much fun, and I love doing what I do.
Well, and it's cool because you get all the different perspectives. So you have some different like game day experience that some folks wouldn't. And I mean, to be honest, sadly, for a lot of people wanting to get into the women's sports world, it is a lot of passion projects. It is a lot of putting in really hard work, putting in a lot of attention and your own time and effort for no pay still. So, you're in good company there, to be something passionate about something that you're hoping to grow. And I hope as well that it comes back and let you make a career of it if you wish. So started the podcast. Tell me about the first guest you had that you were like, what? They were just on my podcast.
I interviewed Jordan Larson a year ago. It was before the Olympics happened. And I think at the time I didn't realize who I was interviewing. There's been a lot of instances where it's been like that. The first specific Women's Sports Matter interview that I did, because I had filmed interviews for school, and I asked the people that I interviewed if I could put it on my podcast, and they said yes. But the first Women's Sports Matter specific one was Lindsay Fry, and she messaged me. She was like, hey, I love what you're doing. Can I go on your show? And I was just like, okay, sure. And so I've had I think with the two Olympians that I'm talking about, I was just like, okay, these are people that are going to come on my show. I'm going to interview them. I'm just going to look up stuff about them, ask them about what's going on. But I interviewed two very important people in the sports world, and I just kind of had no idea. And then I remember I asked Jordan Larson about Athletes Unlimited with the inclusion of volleyball happening in the league. And I didn't know that she played in the league. And, she won that season too. And so afterwards, I was thinking about it. I was looking up something, and I was like, oh my God, she plays in the league, Gianna. You could have asked her about that. And I was just kicking myself because I didn't do enough research. But just honestly, anytime I get to talk to an Olympian, no matter what sport it is, I just am like, I cannot believe they agreed to come on my show because it's just so cool that, what they've done, what it took to get to where they were at. I mean, with Jordan Larson winning 3 different medals in volleyball is just absurd. So, yeah.
When you're talking to the best of the best at that point, right? Like they have reached a level of excellence that few, very, very few do. So it is, yeah, it's an honor to talk to some of them and hear their life story and what gets them up in the morning. That's really cool. Yeah. So you started the podcast and now you're a podcast network. So tell us about the evolution of, from the genesis to where you're at now. How has that gone?
I was planning a rebrand in the spring, and I was talking to my friend. I was like, I kind of want to get rid of name association, and what I mean with that is just like taking my name out of the logo. Um, and I just want to grow it to where it's like, oh, you're listening to Women's Sports Matter. It doesn't matter who's the host. It's just a show where interviews happen, and sometimes the host will talk about things, but that's a very rare occasion, and people should not bank on that happening because I don't want it to happen. I don't think people want to listen to me talk for an hour. They want to hear what's going on and interviews and the athletes' lives and how they got into their sport. And so I was like, I'm gonna do a rebrand. I'm gonna get a new logo. And then I was like, oh, what if there was another show within Women's Sports Matter? Because I did co-host form. I was like, hey, I want to co-host. I don't know if I can just host this show by myself. And then after thinking about it, I'm like, this is my show in like a selfish way. I was like, this is my show. And, nobody's going to be a host with me. I think it's just better if it was just me. But what if I get more people to the team? And so then I brought on C. Rivers, who is hosting Don't Touch My Jersey. And then I was talking to the same friend I was talking about with the logo. I was like, what if I had an athlete host a show? But even like, who would say yes to that? So I reached out to former podcast guest Carly Jackson, who is a goalie for the Toronto Six. And I was like, hey, do you want to host a show for Women's Sports Matter? And she said, absolutely. And so she brought on Zoe Hicks, who works for the LA Dodgers and just recently got a call up to the Canadian baseball women's national team, which is pretty epic. And so now we've got 3 shows part of Women's Sports Matter, and they're hosting more than 5%, which is talking about growing the coverage in women's sports. And so I'm excited to hear athletes' perspectives on what's going on in women's sports and how we can change the game. And Women's Sports Matter is going to stay the same. And Don't Touch My Jersey is about what it's like to be a Black or person of color in the world of women's sports. So we've got a bunch of great people that are going to come on these 2 shows, along with people that are coming on Women's Sports Matter. And it's just going to be a bunch of great conversations happening about women's sports.
That's awesome. Well, we'll put all the notes or all the links to those shows in our notes. So real quick, because you were just not just a host, but your role was host, right?
Yeah.
And now what does your role look like? Because you're still a host, but are you also managing or directing different things?
Yeah, I guess I'm managing, but it's so weird because I was just talking about this with someone. Like, I'm just a 20-year-old college student who was a podcast host, and now I'm in charge of like, what other people are posting and telling them how to do certain things. And it's just like so weird because usually I'm the one that's being directed to do something. So it's like, I can't believe that I put myself in charge of this, but it's also kind of cool to, I guess, have practice for if, I were to become a manager one day in whatever I do later. So I'll already have practiced doing this. So, I mean, it's just fun to work with friends.
Sure.
At the end of the day, they're my friends, and they're people that have a bunch of great ideas to grow women's sports coverage. And we're all just making podcasts. So it's just fun to work with friends.
Well, it's awesome. And it makes a difference. And like you said, it is amazing experience, and just kudos to you for doing it. I mean, age is just a number. If you have passion and you have, these days a computer that you can record on, the sky's the limit. So really kudos to you for just reaching out and building something from scratch. It's not easy. to follow through with it. It's easy to start, but then to like
Yeah.
over 2 years to have something grow, that's pretty amazing. So I'm excited for you and for your growing network. And what would you say are like, I know you just said working with your friends and like getting to interview Olympians. Is there anything else that you like truly love about it? And then what's been difficult in entering into this space?
I think what's fun about podcasting is that, you get to use your voice. I was very shy growing up, and my family loves to tell me how they thought I would be the last person uh, within the many Dorseys, that's my mom's side of the family, to host a show. And I'm like, they're right. They're totally right. But it's just to be able to do something that I've always wanted to do. Growing up, I wanted to be a broadcaster for the White Sox.
Mm.
And now I'm like sitting here and doing podcasts with female athletes. So it's like fun. I guess is the best part of it is that it's fun.
Yeah.
You get to do all this stuff. I think the worst part about it is how I have to like keep myself on track. There was something a month ago. I forgot to record an episode or like get an interview, so I skipped a week. It was an accident, but I just like forgot. So it's like keeping myself on a schedule, and posting on social media is hard too. So I hope people don't expect too much. Again, I'm the one that's behind like the Women's Sports Matter accounts. It's not like a very serious thing, but I forget sometimes to be active on places, and that's another important part of like outreach and getting people involved and getting people to listen to your show or shows now, I guess. So it's just the little things. I'm getting better at it. So yeah.
Yeah, well, personal development, right? And I think it's hard this day and age with social media. The algorithms kind of work against you on Instagram, and then Twitter, things can change in an instant. So, we follow you and you do a great job. So
Thank you.
it's hard though. It's hard to be, the one point person for all different kinds of things. So I think you're doing a great job. So what's exciting? What are you looking forward to? What's coming down the pipeline for your network?
I mean, Don't Touch My Jersey launched a few weeks ago. More Than 5% is launching in mid to late September. Women's Sports Matter with me, it's up in the air. I'm trying to get some sponsors set up and do things with them besides just reading about their company. I plan on going to some Athletes Unlimited games and covering that on my social channels. The doubleheader, the Chicago soccer doubleheader, there's going to be a bunch of coverage on my channels, and for people that will miss that coverage, it'll be archived on Instagram stories, so just below I guess the follow button.
Mm-hmm.
And there's gonna be podcast episodes about it. I'm super excited for that event, but I don't know if there's anything going on with me. It's more like the other shows, because
Yeah, that's exciting though.
I feel like everything exciting that was supposed to happen has already happened. So like everything earlier in July, if there is anything exciting, people will find out on social media, but I don't really have much going on. I'm moving to school in a few weeks. So I'm probably gonna have a bunch of stuff scheduled already to be there, so I don't miss another week. But I think one other thing I'm trying to do is go out and like ask people about women's sports and then post about it to see if people like in my area know about the Chicago Sky, which some people don't. And it's like, how could you not know? But I'm like, I'm not gonna yell at them. I'm gonna educate them about the team and then tell them to go to a game because it's a fun time. So that's all I got.
No, that's awesome. I remember I lived in Orlando and I would go around and be like, do you know that Marta plays here? Greatest player to ever play the game of football on the women's side. And yeah, it was just like appalling, the lack of knowledge. Like if Ronaldo lived in your city, that's the equivalent,
Yeah.
and they didn't even know we had a team. So Awesome. But like I love that. I love the on the ground marketing, right? Like we gotta tell people they're there because once they know, they do show up sometimes, they do turn in. So tune in. So that's awesome. Yeah, I can't get over too that you're still a student, still doing, your jobs and doing this on top. It truly is inspiring. So yeah, so real quick before we get into some rapid fire questions, we'll say, where can people find you on socials and give a follow?
I've got 2 different handles. On Twitter, it's W Sports Matter, and everywhere else is Women's Sports Matter. I made it super easy for everyone to find me. There's just 2 separate handles, not a bunch. We got TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook is Women's Sports Matter, and Twitter is at W Sports Matter. Bunch of fun content on there. And then the other ones, more than 5% is more than, and then 5 is spelt out, and then it's PCT, and that's for both Instagram and Twitter. And then Don't Touch My Jersey is just Don't Touch My Jersey. You can find that on Instagram and Twitter as well.
Awesome. And then Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere. Anywhere you find your podcast except for Anchor. That's what I always say.
There you go.
I used to upload them there. Now I upload on Red Circle. So everywhere except Anchor.
Except Anchor. And real quick, just like speak it into existence. Who would your next dream guest be for your podcast?
Oh my God. Who would my next dream guest? That is such a hard question. I don't really know. I mean, I just watched the Only on Paramount Plus. So maybe Brianna Scurry. I feel like just to talk to her would be really cool. If you haven't watched The Only, go watch The Only. It was a really good documentary. And super eye-opening. I didn't even know everything that happened in there. I'm kind of a new-ish soccer fan. I don't really know much about the 99ers and even the early 2000s teams. I know more about 15 and 19 and now. So if you want to be educated on the US women's national team, go watch The Only. It's a really good documentary.
Great plug. I mean, I think just for the plug alone, Brianna Scurry, hit up Women's Sports Matter. No, that's awesome. And that was actually maybe a segue into rapid fire because that one just came off the cuff. So rapid fire, here we go. And all those links we'll put in the show notes. So what is your favorite walk-up song that you've ever heard at a White Sox game?
Jose Abreu has well, at least I know this when he gets a hit, it'll be they'll say Jose, 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 Jose. So I think that one's funny. I think just it's a great walk-up song. A bunch of the players have country music, and it's just I don't vibe with that, so I don't really care. But I like the thing that happens when Jose Abreu gets a hit. So that's my answer.
That's fair. That's fair. You just mentioned The Only, but what is your what's your absolute favorite sports movie?
There's a lot. I really like LFG. LFG's a good one. Talking about again the US Women's national team. A League of Their Own. That's another good one that I think, but it's probably my favorite.
Are you excited for that series that's coming out soon?
I am, but I do not know my mom's login to Prime, so I gotta ask her for that one.
Yeah, before you move into school, make sure you get that one. Make sure you get all logins before you go to school.
Yes.
Oh, that's funny. Who do you think is the greatest athlete of all time?
Greatest? For women's and men's sports?
Yeah, let's do both. Or just non-binary, whoever. 2. We'll do 2.
That is, I feel well, I don't know every sport. So I feel if I say one thing, people are gonna be like, how could you not talk about this one? And I'm like,
oh no, there's no judgment here in your answers.
Because I am someone that lives in the Chicagoland area, I will say for men's sports, I'll give to Michael Jordan.
Okay.
I've heard a lot about, when he was playing here, and my family went to a few Bulls games, and he did a lot, I think. I know about the bowls for people that are wondering. I'm just like playing it off a little bit. Um, for the women's sports world, there's so many different amazing great athletes. Um, like there's Sue Bird, there's you know, there's so many different soccer players that come to mind. Christine Sinclair. Um, I'm just gonna give it to Sinclair at this
Okay.
point. Like the most international goals for both men's and women's is just unbelievable. NWSL titles, gold medal with the women's national team at the Olympics. What's not to love? So I'm gonna say my women's sports goat is Christine Sinclair.
Love it. Amazing. All right. If you can get tickets for life for any sport event, any sporting event that happens, whenever it happens, if it's every 4 years, it's the Olympics. If it's every year, it's, the women's NWSL final. What are you getting tickets for life for?
I think I'll get it for the Women's World Cup.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. You could go to Australia next year. Are you going to go? Are you going to try to go?
I'm trying to see if there's a way I can maybe do something with school, if it's like an internship through like Fox or something like that. I don't really know much about study abroad, so I want to see if I can get it worked in, because I would really love to go. I think it'd be a very cool experience. It's an expanded World Cup. A bunch of more teams are coming in. Teams that I didn't even know had a women's national team. So I love being educated every day and surprised about how, like there's a Moroccan national team and they're really good. And so is South Africa. Just, I love learning. So would love to learn about different national teams every 4 years. So definitely the World Cup.
It's awesome. I love that. All right. Last question. What do you just hope continues to change and progress in the world of women's sports?
I would love if to watch a women's sporting event, it didn't have to be on a streaming service. If there was, like a set channel, there's MLB Network, NHL Network, NBA TV. If there was like an NWSL network or something where we can just have all these games going on and you can watch them without having to pay a certain fee every month. Or even watch on Twitch because the streams are trash, and just a TV network would be nice.
Awesome. Love that. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast. And like I said, all the links to connect with Gianna and all the other podcasts that they have at the Women's Sports Matter Podcast Network. Really, really excited to chat with you and to see what happens with this podcast. It's amazing what you're doing and keep doing it. And just thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.